If you're anything like me, you spend quite a bit of time watching synthesizer videos, watching folks talk about a new product that's coming out, watching them demonstrate something that they have, talking about features of synthesizers they used to have. And one thing I find really interesting is the number of comments that come in on videos where, especially when you're talking about a vintage synthesizer, where folks are saying, man, that was my first synthesizer and I really wish I had that back, or I still use it to this day. And so I got to thinking about our attachment to our first synthesizer, and I thought it might be an interesting topic to explore. What was your first synthesizer and how did you use it and why did you get that? Was it the only synthesizer you had? Did you do a lot of recording or writing with it? Did you do a lot of performing? Are you primarily a performer? And then there's questions like, do you still have it? If you do, why do you have it? Is it something that you continue to use to this day? If you don't have it, why not? And a follow-up question that I think is always interesting is, if you don't still have it, but you had the chance to get it back, would you? I think for me in particular, I have a certain sense of nostalgia for things that I used to have and don't now if they made an impact on me. And so synthesizers are no exception. Music is important to me, and the gear I've had over the years, not all of it's been great, but some of it I would like to have back. So as I got to thinking about this topic, I thought it would make an interesting video, but then I really got to thinking, well, there's some fantastic YouTube creators out there that, I would really like to talk to them and get their take on their first synthesizers. And so I sent out some email requests to some folks that I've actually communicated directly with on YouTube in a couple of cases, and in a couple of cases, folks that I've not had the chance to talk to personally, but enjoy their content. And so all four of these folks were gracious enough to provide me with some video footage talking about their first synthesizers. So what I'd like to do is just introduce each of the presenters just prior to their video, and just tell you how I came to know about them, and then let them tell their story. So first up, we have Woody from Woody's Piano Shack, and I'm sure that if you're watching this video, you're no stranger to Woody and to his work. He is a fantastic musician. I love watching his gear reviews. He does such a good job of covering the things that I find important to me when he's talking about a piece of gear. And you don't always get that from YouTube reviews, but Woody just seems to nail it every time. So my sincere thanks to Woody for taking the time to make this video and participating with us. Here's Woody.
Hello, Woody here, and a big thank you to Matthew for having me on your channel. Yes, I do have an interesting story to tell about my first synthesizer. So my dad had a job where he had access to some electronic test equipment like signal generators, oscilloscopes and so on. And I remember he used to bring that home and we used to connect microphones to it and look at the frequencies on a spectrum analyzer or something like that. And I guess he could see that I was really into all that stuff. And he said to me that if I wrote a book all about how synthesizers work, then he'd buy one for the family. I think he probably wanted one for himself, but the way he got it through my mum was to say it was for the family. But anyway, yes, I got a notebook, a school notebook, and filled it up with all the information about synthesizers. I learned all about filters and the different types of waveforms and so on. I wonder where that book is right now. I'm guessing that my mum and dad might have kept that. It would be pretty awesome to revisit that and perhaps feature it in a video. But yes, at the age of about 10 or so, I wrote a book all about how synthesizers work. And then I remember it was Christmas morning the same year, and I came down from my bedroom in the morning together with my sister, and we heard a lot of strange bleeping and blooping noises coming from the spare room. And my dad had bought an MS-20, a Korg MS-20 semi-modular synthesizer for the family, and he had patched it up. It had like a patch bay that you can connect up, and he had some random tones going, so it sounded like something from the bridge of Star Trek. Lots of bleeping and blooping noises, and that was really exciting for me, of course. For my sister, perhaps not so much. But yeah, anyway, that was the start of my synthesizer career at the age of about 10 with the Korg MS-20. In case you're wondering where it is today, what happened to that first synthesizer? Well, after a couple of years of me playing it in the house, it was packed back up into its original box, put in the back of the wardrobe, and that's where it remains today, back in the UK. Yeah, I've got a strong feeling that this might be the best condition MS-20 in the world. One of the original units, just used on a few occasions at home, put back in the box and then stored for 30, or is it, yeah, even 40, yeah, almost 43 years or something. That's been in the back of the closet and presumably in perfect condition. And that's also given me an idea for a really nice video in the future. Perhaps we could do an unboxing of new old stock Korg MS-20. So that's my story. Thank you, Matt, for having me on your channel. I'll see you all later. Cheerio.
All right. Thanks for sharing that, Woody. It's interesting that, you know, the synthesizer that he was first exposed to came about because his father played, and it's always cool to me to hear stories about families and synthesizers. If you've watched my channel for very long, you'll know that my dad and I work on synthesizers just kind of as a sideline, something fun to do. I've learned a lot from him, so it's been a great experience to work on those together. So again, I appreciate that father-son connection. My next presenter is Unrelated Notes. I came across his channel, it's probably been nearly a year ago, and one of his videos really sparked some questions in me, and I reached out, and he was gracious enough to return my email, and we ended up being able to set up a video chat and talk for a little while. Really enjoyed his knowledge and his expertise, but take a look at his video about his first synthesizer. Again, this is Unrelated Notes.
Hi there, this is Unrelated Notes, and I've been asked to talk about my very first synth. So my first programmable synth was a Korg Poly 800, and as a kid and a burgeoning pianist in the early to mid 80s, having heard Wendy Carlos's Switched on Bach, with all the great keyboard-oriented pop music on the radio at that time, synthesizers were definitely on my radar. And at one point, I'd received a Castile electronic keyboard for Christmas, but it was somewhat limited and I quickly outgrew it. So I'd been drooling over all of the gear and all the advertised equipment in Keyboard magazine, and I started begging my parents for a real synth. So in those days, if you wanted to sell something, you placed an ad in the classified sections of your local newspaper. I was searching the musical instruments section and came across an ad for a Korg Poly 800 and a Crate 1R guitar amp, and the guy was using it basically as a keyboard monitor or a practice amp at his house. And all of this was for $300, which even at that time was still a pretty good deal. So I showed my parents the ad, and we called the seller up, arranged a time to meet, and headed on over. We got there, and if I remember correctly, it was nighttime, and there might have been some light rain. I don't know why I remember that, but I do. My dad waited in the car, and I went inside, met the teenager who owned the keyboard and amp. We chatted a bit, showed the Poly 800 to me. It sounded great, handed over the cash, packed it up in the car, and took it home. Although I've forgotten most of the ins and outs of the Poly 800, at that time I absorbed as much as I could about it. Read the owner's manual from front to back, learned how to load the sounds via cassette tape, programmed simple riffs into the onboard sequencer, and tweaked the sounds, the presets on there, tried to program my own. And I was totally engrossed with it, loved it. And it became the cornerstone of my keyboard rig in the late 80s and the early 1990s. And what I would do typically is I would layer it with something else to give it a fuller sound, particularly once digital synths took over. At some point in the mid-1990s, I'd kind of grown tired of it, but I ended up selling it. Workstations were king then, so that was what I was into. But for the past 5 or so years, I've wanted to pick up another one strictly based on nostalgia. I'd repurchased a Casio MT100, which was my first electronic keyboard. And that was just to remind myself where I started. I don't ever want to forget that. And so for the same purpose, kept my eye out for a Korg Poly 800. Recently, I did finally find one that was reasonably priced and pretty decent condition for the amount that was being asked. So I picked it up. You know, considering it's almost 40 years old, it's still kicking along pretty good. I don't really actively use it too much anymore. I just like having it there just to remind me. And as I've recently reacquired it, I really haven't had much chance to do anything with it. But I am keen to try to layer it with some things on some future stuff I may write. I don't know that I would use it by itself. You know, I know in a lot of online forums and elsewhere, the Poly 100 catches a lot of flack for its sound, and of course its difficulty in programming. I'll be the first to admit it's not fun to program. But at the same time, I still love it because it was my first synth, and today it's still, you know, it's proudly sitting in my studio on one of my keyboard stands, and I don't see myself ever getting rid of it again.
My thanks to Unrelated Notes for that contribution to this video. I can relate to the idea of going out and finding something that you had before and getting it back. At some point, I'll share a story about my first synthesizer, and I've gone through the same thing. I've gone back out and picked one up years after I had sold it. So it's a very interesting story, and it's always neat to hear when folks, you know, have that attachment. They think, man, I wish I had that back, and have a chance to get it back and incorporate it into their modern workflow. So this next presenter is what I would like to consider a good friend of mine. Hopefully he agrees. Ian and I speak periodically. The time difference makes it a little tricky sometimes. He's about 6 hours ahead of me in a different part of the world. But I love the guy to death. We've had great conversations about synthesizers, and I now understand what a quid is versus, oh, wait a second, I forgot. Quid, pounds, and I don't remember. Oh no, we're going to have another lesson on this, Ian. Pence? Quid and pence, maybe? But anyway, I've had just a fantastic time getting to know him, and I've also learned that I don't pronounce his name correctly. I say Ian Waugh, but it is Ian War. So thank you for the correction on that, sir. Please check out his channel also if you haven't had a chance to become familiar with his work. He has such a great and unique perspective on electronic music, on synthesizers, on software, and I've really come to admire him and respect his position and his viewpoint on things. So anyway, without further ado, here is Ian War.
Thank you to Matt for giving me the opportunity to talk about synthesizers. He was asking about my first synth, and I actually can't remember what my first synth was. I know this is going to sound like sacrilege to some vintage synthesizer aficionados. It was a Roland J something or other. Now, checking the timeline of when I actually did buy this synth I'm going to talk about, I think this is probably a Jupiter 8. Didn't really get on with it. Sent it back to the shop. Don't regret it. I have a Roland System 8 which can do the Jupiter 8 and other things. One of the reasons why I didn't keep it is because I really wanted a proper synthesizer. To me that meant something like this. Some of my favourite artists at the time were Keith Emerson, Tangerine Dream, Jean-Michel Jarre. And I knew the only way to get all these synthy sounds was to get a synth which allowed me to patch anything to anything else, so anything was possible. So while I really wanted one of these, or one of these, the ARP2600, I did actually get one of these thanks to Mr. Berenger a couple of years ago. I would also have loved one of these. This is a Roland 700 system, and I met a man who had one of these, and through him I got the synth I'm going to talk about, the Roland 100M system. This was one of Roland's first affordable modular synth systems. I was really tempted by the Roland System 100, which was released in 1975. However, it was not quite as powerful or flexible as the System 100M. Now, you had to buy the modules in the System 100M individually, and there were quite a lot to choose from. You had to fit them into a rack to power them. There were 2 racks, a 3-module rack and a 5-module rack. I actually wanted 6 modules. So after some discussion, it was decided that yes, a 5-module rack would power 6 modules. So these are the modules I eventually bought. This is the 112, a dual VCO module. The 121 module is a dual VCF, obviously to go with the dual VCOs. The 130 is a dual VCA module. Getting the picture here? And the 140 was a dual ADSR plus an LFO. So that is the basic modules you need for any subtractive synth system. I also got the 150. This was a super little module. It included ring mod, it included pink and white noise, it had a sample and hold module, and another LFO. Brilliant. But the module I probably had the most fun with was the 182 sequencer. This had 2 sets of 8 steps which you could run in series to create a 16-step sequencer, or in parallel to create 2 separate 8-step streams. I also got a keyboard, so my setup looked a little bit like this, although if you can imagine an extra module hanging off the end. I was all set to sound like Now, to add to my little setup, I also got the Roland Space Echo. I got the big one with chorus and stuff like that. This was a super little unit. Expensive, but really nice. So I was all set to create music to sound like one of my heroes. Except the 100M was a monophonic synthesizer, so I needed a way to multi-track it. Now this was around 1980-81. Home computers hadn't been invented, so I bought a TX4 track, an A3440. And this was the basis of my studio in the 1980s. And I had a massive amount of fun with this synthesizer. Now I have very little music examples that I recorded with the 100M system from that time. But here are 3 short extracts from pieces which I somehow managed to retain. And these are created solely by multi-tracking the 100M system. Before buying the 100M, I read a massive number of textbooks and magazine articles on synthesis, so I had a vague idea of how everything fit together to produce sound. I learned a massive amount about synthesis and synthesizer techniques from the 100M system. Now, I used this for several years. I think I sold it around 1984, maybe 1985. MIDI had come out. I realized that anything without MIDI was going to disappear into the black hole of obsolete technology. Obviously, that didn't happen, but I didn't know that at the time. However, I don't regret selling it. I had a massive amount of fun with it, and I learned an awful lot from it. Now, thanks to Mr. Behringer, you can buy a sort of duplicate of the 100M system in the form of Behringer modules. However, I am not tempted to recreate this. I did buy the dual ADSR module because I have a bit of a Eurorack system and wanted a couple of ADSR modules. But the Behringer system doesn't really have the same feel or the same vibe as the 100M system. That Eurorack modules are smaller for a start and they just haven't got the colour right. Trying to recreate an old synth is fine and great if that's what you want to do, but if you want a modern modular system, that it makes more sense to me certainly to pick and choose modules from the Eurorack collection. You get a much more powerful synthesizer. So that's the story of my first proper synth. It was a super piece of kit, but I'm really happy pushing forward now into the 21st century with all the wonderful bits of hardware and software we have available. I hope you enjoyed that little blast into my musical past. Thanks again to Matt. Bye for now.
So my final guest for today has a fantastically unique YouTube channel, and I found it actually, I think because of a Yamaha CS60 video he had posted some time back. And I watched the video and I was entertained by it and informed and loved the sound of the music. And so went to click onto his channel and found a whole other section of content in addition to synthesizers that wasn't really up my alley, but I've just been fascinated by the channel. It's such a great combination. You'll just have to check it out for yourself. One of the reasons I reached out to Raymond in order to try to get him to contribute here as well is he shared a little bit of his synthesizer history in some of his live streams that he does. I'd asked a couple of questions in the past, but also interesting is that I found out he's pretty local to where I am. Like we could potentially share a cup of coffee someday, and hopefully we can. But I'm fascinated by his channel and his content, and I hope that you will be equally mesmerized as I am when I watch his content by the story of his first synthesizer. So here is Raymond Castile from Raymond Castile's Basement of Horror.
I was asked to talk about my first synthesizer, and I have it right here. It's not this. It's this, a Casio VL1 or Casio VL Tone. It was released in 1981. This was the first musical instrument that Casio made. The model number is VL1, but it's often called the VL Tone. And that's because the series that it's from is called VL Tone. And this is my actual childhood one. I got it when I was a little kid. And I still have accessories for it. Here's the bag it came in. A little carry case. It's seen better days. I wouldn't store it in this, but I still saved the bag. And here's the original instruction booklet. It's falling apart, but still there. Still have it. And it has handwritten notes by me. A little, like you can actually synthesize new sounds with this. And I've got the numbers for patches that I made scribbled in this little book. And I've got more booklets that talk about sounds you can make and have sheet music for songs you can play, like Christmas songs and popular songs. And one book is all about how to program sounds. I did a video about this several years ago where I played this instrument along with the Juno 60 over here. Let's make sure this is working. Yep, there it is. So if you look on my channel, I'm Raymond Castile. I should have introduced myself. I'm Raymond Castile. I'm sure the person putting this all together is going to put a caption or something saying who I am. But I'm Raymond Castile, and as you can tell, I play synthesizers. And I was asked, because I have a YouTube channel, it's got other synthesizer videos, I was asked to do this one. But you can look up Raymond Castile and find a video of me playing this Casio VL tone with the Geno 60 while I play this VL tone. And in that video, I'm using a volume pedal, which I'm not using today, so I was able to be a little more expressive in that one. In this one, I'm just going to give you the basic tones. Now, there is some echo and stuff for my mixer on this, but this is what it sounds like. Well, that's what it sounds like going through effects and stuff. Just running through all the sounds it can make. Not a very impressive sound. And here's the synthesizer section. This is one that I was able to program into it. And you can go up and down octaves. And there's even a sequencer on here. You can program in a few notes and you can play it automatically, or you can run through it manually and it'll play the notes that you input. And there's a calculator if you want to do a little math. I got this, oh gosh, how old would I have been? 1981. Yeah, let's put this over here. Oh, okay, put it right there. There we go. So 1981. Oh, I guess I was 12 or 13 when I got that. So I guess I was still a child, not quite a teenager. It was right at that dividing line between childhood and adolescence. And I was really into Vangelis and Jean-Michel Jarre and John Carpenter, all kinds of synth heroes at the time. And I wanted to sound just like them. And I didn't know what a synthesizer really was. I mean, I knew what it was a keyboard. I knew these musicians I liked played synthesizers, but I didn't know how a synthesizer worked. You know, I didn't know analog or digital. They didn't really have digital quite yet. It was just beginning to come on. I didn't know like polyphonic or monophonic. I didn't know anything like that. I just knew synthesizers were electronic keyboards that my musical heroes played, and I wanted to play them too. So I thought I would be able to get something like this Casio VL1 and sound like Vangelis. Like, why? It's a synthesizer. Why wouldn't that work? And as a kid, I had a little, very primitive tape recorder, not like, like a reel-to-reel or something, just a little, like a Montgomery Ward cassette recorder. And it was broken so that when you recorded something, it wouldn't erase the thing that you had previously recorded. So it was like a multi-track recorder, but you couldn't hear the previous tracks. Every time you recorded something, it would record it on top of whatever was already on the tape. But you had no reference to what was already there. And I would do these weird experimental recordings where I would take my VL1 and I would record, I'd fill an entire side of the tape just doodling on that thing. And then I'd go back to the beginning and record it again and again and again. And I had no reference to the previous take. And then I would hear what this would sound like. It would just be this cacophony of all these weird sounds. And every now and then there'd be an accidental passage that would sound musical or interesting. And if I had a professional cassette deck today, I would take that recording, that one I did in childhood, and transfer it to digital and maybe play around with it or edit it or add some effects or see what I could do with it and try to realize what I had in my head at the time, now that I've got the ability to do that. But I don't have a cassette tape machine, and I've got some junky ones, but I don't want to risk putting that tape in one of those junky machines and eating it up. That's a childhood heirloom, and one day I'll hear it again. One day I'll have a good tape deck and I'll hear it again. But this VL1, as primitive as it is and simple as it is, that really started me towards playing synthesizers and trying to create electronic music. And it's all I had for a few years. And then finally I got a Yamaha DX21. I was in high school. And again, I didn't understand the difference between analog and digital. Again, I thought, I'm going to sound like Vangelis. Sure, it's a synthesizer, isn't it? And I didn't understand why I didn't sound just like Vangelis, or just like John Carpenter, or Jean-Michel Jarre. I didn't have effects. I just had like a single bass speaker, so I plugged it right into this speaker meant for a bass guitar. You can imagine how stupid it sounded. I know today there's kind of a cult around the Yamaha DX21 and DX27 and DX100, those cheap, alternatives to the DX7. Back then, there was no such cult, and I was very frustrated playing that thing, trying to make it sound like the albums I was listening to. I could have done much more with that if I had known to get some effects, get like a chorus and delay and reverb, get a proper mixer, get proper speakers. If I could have outfitted myself with all that, I would have gone much further with that simple DX21, but I didn't know that at the time. And finally, I just gave it away. It was actually in the 21st century. I kept it that long. It was in the age of social media, so I'm thinking around 2010 or thereabouts. I saw someone online saying, "Woe is me, I can't afford a synthesizer. I wish I had a synthesizer." It was a musician that couldn't afford a synthesizer, but I noticed they lived in my area, so I said, "You want a synthesizer? Meet me at this coffee shop and you will have a synthesizer." So I met the guy, didn't know him, perfect stranger, and I just gave him the DX21 and said, "There's a synthesizer." I don't play this Casio anymore. I haven't played this since I made that other video. I'm playing it out of these speakers. But if I were playing it out of this onboard speaker, I could do like a wah-wah, which I used to do. I'd go wow, wow, but I can't do that. with it playing out of the speakers there. Well, now you can't see it. I don't really know that this is musically very useful. I can't really imagine, except as a kind of a gimmick, doing a serious piece with this. I mean, it's got some interesting sounds, like this kind of stuff. I don't really have anything else that sounds quite like that. But then I don't really know that I want anything else that sounds quite like that. I don't know that it's... I don't really have a call to use that very much. But it's kind of interesting. Well, what else can I say? I still have my childhood VL1. I have more instruments than I did in childhood, and more of the kind of things that I really wanted back then. This was more what I was trying to get at back then, but I thought I could use this to make something like that. I just didn't understand the difference. I thought synthesizer is a synthesizer, so why wouldn't it work? And it all started with this little guy, and I still have him. I still have almost all of my synths that I've ever bought. There's only been a couple I've ever sold. And I don't know if I'm going to buy many more, but I'll probably buy a few more before I'm through. But I like the setup I have now. I think I've got a pretty good arrangement here. And I still have this. Maybe I'll find a way to incorporate it one of these days into a proper recording. But for now, if you want to hear quite a bit of this, look at my YouTube channel, look at the video I did with this VL tone and the Juno 60, and there's at least 20 minutes of just playing, no talking, just playing. I think that's about it. So thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed this or got something out of it. And I hope you enjoy watching the other synth YouTubers talking about their first synth. Bye-bye.
Well, thank you for sticking around to watch this video. I wanted to extend my sincere thanks to all 4 of my contributors today. Thank you guys so much. This was a joy to make. It wouldn't have been the same without you, and I really appreciate everything. I hope maybe to put another one of these together in the near future, and maybe do a story about my first synth on the same video. So anyway, stick around the channel. If you haven't had a chance to subscribe, I hope that you'll consider doing that now. Again, I appreciate your time. Thanks for being here, and we'll see you in the next video. Thanks.